Welcome back to the studios here in Baku in Azerbaijan on the Caspian Sea. We've come to our final episode of certainly this period during COP29 of our Buy More Time show, our daily methane show about methane, and also we've covered some of the other super pollutants, and it's been wonderful to do it in collaboration with the United Nations Environment Programme hosted Climate and Clean Air Coalition Secretariat. We were going to be joined today first by Catherine Stewart, who is the Ambassador for Climate Change for the Government of Canada, but unfortunately she's hit a new world record with We Don't Have Time. She not only cancelled once, she's cancelled twice. So that's really incredible. It's good to see developments in this area of widespread cancelling. She is actually stuck in the plenary and sends her deep and sincere apologies to you, the viewer, to me, and to our next two guests. They are, first up, and we're going to slightly shorten this 30-minute show to understand that we've got two guests now rather than three. So first up is Martina Otto, and she's, as I mentioned, with the Climate and Clean Air Coalition Secretariat, the head of that. And we're also going to be followed shortly afterwards by Sir David King, the former UK Chief Scientist and Chair of the Climate Crisis Advisory Group. But let me come to you first, Martina. This COP and also, I suppose, the last COP as well, if you put them together, have been something like an unbelievable unleashing of momentum on the question of methane and basically cutting methane, backed up by good new science, lots of work by the International Energy Agency as well, backed up by the work you're doing in terms of assisting countries, particularly developing countries, get on this journey quickly to reduce their emissions of methane. And then, of course, you know, ClimateSat, this new satellite, which everyone's raving about, that can actually in real time spot leaks of methane, I think down to 25 square meters, something like that. It's very, very good at its accuracy. That is kind of proving that no one can hide anymore, and the real quantities of methane coming to the atmosphere are actually being seen and glimpsed for the first time, which is kind of a bit of a headache on one level, but it does mean we have a baseline now, and everybody knows that if they act, we can see them acting from space. But tell me, Martina, briefly, I hope you're excited about what's been going on, and any announcements that you felt were really super during this COP29 as it relates to methane. Don't worry about the rest of it. It's really a mess. But as it relates to methane, maybe there were some highlights.
Fantastic. Hi, Nick, and thanks for this introduction. Pleasure to be with you in this last session on methane from this COP. Certainly not the last overall. I'm pretty sure we'll hear more. And indeed, putting the negotiations aside, all the events that took place on methane, they were a sign of hope. They were an area of hope. There was a lot of positive energy in the room. We have seen that a real community has built. There's a movement that's out there, and you put it very well. The satellites help us to make the invisible visible and keep us on our toes. At the same time, science has told us not only that this is a must-do action, and Ingmar's little video showed it very clearly, it's the emergency brake on this climate emergency that can give us these fractions of degrees that we need to help avoid hitting those tipping points. But it's really a can-do area. There's a lot of solutions that are out there, and people have really bought into this narrative and are looking at taking them on. In terms of announcements, finance, last year we had this big announcement of 1 billion with the finance sprint that was led by the US. This time it was much more organic, things coming together with about 500 million from philanthropies, the EU adding 100 million in grant funding, getting the IEB and the EBRD development banks on board with this, the World Bank and IFAD, again, multilateral development banking side, are rolling out programs, so really to provide concrete help. We see bilateral support coming in, so there is some movement, but definitely we need more dollars at the moment. It's sort of about 2% of climate finance going into the methane space. On regulation, we saw quite a bit as well, if I may, with the US putting in fines on those who actually don't address the methane leaks, for example. The EU taking it from a trade angle and having a deal between producers and buyers. China really getting into coal and reducing coal bed methane as well. We've set up a fossil fuel regulatory program with the UK putting in money into that. We have seen Brazil with an announcement on putting short-lived climate pollutants into the next round of the NDCs, and the same goes actually for the UK and UAE. And we have seen as well a declaration on organic waste methane, chaperoned by the COP presidency and joined by over 30 countries representing almost half of waste methane emissions. Maybe I stop with that, but there has been quite a bit of progress. We will need to do more, that's clear. For me, we have to earn our AAA, so that's A, more ambition, more action, and more alliances, how people come together. There will be Article 6 opportunities as well, just looking into those.
I would just say, coming back on that, that I was actually having a look around this morning at kind of other announcements, and there's lots of kind of interesting small announcements. So, I mean, Greenpeace has come behind it through the lens of livestock. So Greenpeace was saying, if only we could reduce, emissions from livestock, we could maybe shave 0.1 degrees centigrade off the current warming. And then I saw investors with $2 trillion under asset in the USA, urging that the individual states of the Union in America follow the new federal regulations on methane that have been adopted. And there's a lot of small announcements like those. And of course, again, recalling what Ed Miliband said, the British minister responsible for climate change, saying that, methane is a sprint and carbon dioxide is a marathon. So it seems that now the nuance is coming in that we have different timescales with these pollutants, and maybe we can work with that rather than against it to, buy us more time, or at least get on track better for the real emission cuts that are needed. But let's just leave it here. Let's bring in Sir David, who's coming in from the UK. And Sir David, it's a great pleasure to see you. And our guests are from all around the world, but they may not know the current organisation you're with right now fully. But I think many people know you as a top scientist and a very senior scientist in the world. What are your thoughts about? Is this a good idea to attack the short-lived superheating methane as at least a way of getting ourselves a bit further down the road than where we are right now, knowing fully that we can't abdicate our responsibilities to decarbonizing the global economy, because that's really the ultimate prize of the Paris Agreement, but that maybe methane has some opportunities for us? Sir David, I think you might be muted, sir.
I am indeed muted. So thank you very much, Nick. I'm delighted to be here with you. I'm going to say, yes, we need to be doing all of the above and much more. So let me explain this by using numbers. I am a scientist, so you'll have to excuse me. The pre-industrial level of methane, of overall greenhouse gases in the atmosphere was 275, 280 parts per million. And that's how we evolved into that level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The temperatures, the weather patterns that we live by, we have become adapted to as well. Today, the total level of greenhouse gases, including methane and NOx, is over 500 parts per million. Yes, 427 is the carbon dioxide level. The rest is basically methane. Methane per molecule is about 120 times more effective as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide per molecule. And what that means is that methane levels are seemingly low. So 427 parts per million of carbon dioxide, but compare that with methane, and we're talking about a few parts per million. But multiply those few parts per million by 120, which is what you should do. Any lower number refers to the half-life of the methane in the atmosphere and doesn't seem relevant to me. Then you're way over 500. So what I'm actually saying is we have no future unless we can manage to reduce both the methane levels in the atmosphere, but I'm also saying reduce the carbon dioxide levels. We've already gone too far. So let's focus on methane, which is what you asked me to do. Methane half-life, I'm using the right expression there, is 12 years. In other words, if I have a level of, let's say, 20 in whatever units at time zero, if I've cut methane production down to zero, in 12 years' time, I will be half that level. And in 12 years after that, half of that level. And so we mustn't think that it just all disappears over 12 years.
Right.
So the next thing is to focus on, could we remove methane? Well, it's only a couple of parts per million. And it would be, in my view, I know there are people working on this, but in my view, that's not the way forward. The right way forward is what's being discussed, and your organization has got this exactly right. We have to stop producing methane into the atmosphere. That's the most important thing we can do because of this relatively short half-life. If we could stop the methane production from the fossil fuel industry, and that has to be the major objective, that 35% of the total level of methane is critical. That is the pathway we've got to focus on. Now we come to agriculture. Another 40% of methane comes from agriculture, much more complicated. Rice, for example, is a big source of methane, and we're not going to stop producing rice. It's such a key part of how humanity survives. We know that as we move forward in time, we should have much less dependence on livestock, farm livestock, particularly cattle, beef cattle and milk cattle. We need to see if we can limit that. Unfortunately, and this is not an unfortunate fact, the level of well-being in the world is increasing extremely rapidly. What we know is that in China, because of their rapid growth in their economy and their spreading wealth across the people, about 800 to 850 million people were taken out of poverty just in China between 2000 and 2020. And guess what? That population demands more electricity, demands more beef, more cow products. And so what we have is a bigger and bigger demand going forward in time. We've got to manage this through human behavior as much as anything else. Yes, we can try feeding cattle, and there's a lot of work being going on in New Zealand and Denmark on how we can stop methane production from animals. We can do that, but there's another side to it, which is human behavior. We eat far too much meat. It's not even good for us. So I think we need to move forward on both those fronts. Now, how do we buy more time? Buy more time by removing methane, not as a priority, as an equal priority to the emissions of carbon dioxide, but also to removing carbon dioxide. We hear a lot of talk about getting to net zero by 2050. And of course, this began through the UK Prime Minister making that statement way back in time. What do we mean by net zero? There will be 9 billion people on the planet by mid-century. Let's suppose we could get that down to 1 ton per person per annum of levels of carbon dioxide that we cannot avoid emitting. And that's probably possible. That means we have to capture 9 billion tons of carbon dioxide a year by 2050. We have to focus on delivering that as well as all the other issues. And And let me also say, we are at a level of carbon dioxide. If all of the methane levels were to drop tomorrow to zero, we still have a problem. And if all of the carbon dioxide emission levels were to drop to zero tomorrow, we still have a problem. So I come to the tipping points that were mentioned in the opening speech. I'm afraid the Arctic Circle is either very close to tipping or is already tipping. Greenland is now losing ice at the rate of 30 million tons an hour. That's billions of tons a year, all going into the ocean, all pushing up sea levels. And the Arctic warming is 3 times the level of the average of the planet. So what we're looking at is a crisis that is with us today. Your name, We Don't Have Time, is extremely appropriate. So I leave you with that. I think we have an enormous challenge ahead of us, but we know what we need to do, and we need to get on and do it.
Thanks very much indeed, Sir David. So what you would say is that you think these efforts being made by the UN in the guise of Martina, but the nations as well and the private sector on the methane is a very worthwhile thing to do right now, but it's only going to give us a little bit of a breathing space in the short term if we don't deal with CO2 and if we don't plan to actually remove CO2 going forward into the future, then we're going to be in a very tricky spot. So, I mean, you brought an extra element in, which is actually removing CO2. CO2 removals. Yeah, okay. That's fair enough. And you're a top scientist, and I bow to your knowledge. So thank you, Sir David. Martina, I think we're going to be wrapping up in a minute here, but thank you very much indeed for being with us. And we look forward to the next 12 months, hopefully with positive tipping points in the area of methane. And let's really keep pushing on that, whilst, of course, as Sir David says, and as we both know, keeping our eyes on pushing hard on CO2 and the other pollutants. Yeah.
Absolutely, Nick. And I think there will be a lot of activity between now and the next COP as well. We are working very closely with the next COP presidency, Brazil, already. We've started working on tropical agriculture to get a bit more of a handle on that area, which is sensitive. And so David mentioned that very, very well. There is a number of things we can do with productivity gains. We have to do those because there's something in it for the farmers as well. But really teasing that out much more, and then making good on this declaration that was just launched by the COP presidency this time, so Azerbaijan. And we have seen a lot of buy-in also regionally from Latin American countries closing dump sites. Nobody wants to have a dump site next by. So I think there's a number of reasons why we can take action on that. They come in and help with the reason of cutting methane. And if we take some of the waste methane areas early on, we can help improve circularity, circular economy. We can help as well with food security if we make sure that food is actually getting to people and not to landfill in the first place. So there's a number of things that we can do also in the other sectors. While we have to really keep an eye on oil and gas, there is no excuse in that space for sure.
Yeah. Good. Thank you so much indeed. Thank you, Martina. Thank you, Sir David, for finding the time to be with us. And that was very helpful as a way of closing this almost 2 weeks of broadcasting on the methane topic. So, bye, everybody.
Thank you.